Well, take me back, Mariana, to before when you joined the National Butterfly Center in 2012. You were a business development specialist. You were going to take it over to become the executive director. What was the border like in Mission, Texas at that time? What was the awareness of what was going on?
Well, the border honestly has not really changed very much from 2012 to today, at least not in the National Butterfly Center. It's peaceful. We host over 6,000 school children a year. We do an annual sleepover under the stars on the banks of the Rio Grande River with Girl Scouts and their troop leaders. We grow plants in our nursery. We sell to the public and to commercial landscapers. We host the Texas Butterfly Festival. All of these things go on with no invasion, no lawless aggression, no terror from drug lords and rapists and all of the things that come out of the president's mouth. That is alien to us. Like, I don't know. I mean, it seems like something maybe from Japanese anime or some fantastic film, not our reality at all.
And that's the thing that I'm curious about, because how did you get word that things were changing? How did that communicated to you?
It was not communicated to me. What happened is July 20th, 2017, I believe it was a Thursday, I drove over the levee on our property, which runs all the way to the river. And when I crossed the levee, there were 5 strangers on our property.
On your property?
On our private property that belongs to the nonprofit North American Butterfly Association. 3 of the men had chainsaws and all their safety gear. They were cutting down our trees, and 2 men were on heavy equipment. One was driving a brush hog, and one was driving a brush boom. So it's like the brush hog, but it has this reticulated arm.
Yeah.
And they were just desiccating the habitat, widening the road. And of course,
on your property?
On our property. And I got out of the car and I'm waving and I'm screaming and, hey, time out, like what's going on here? And one of the guys stopped, one of the chainsaw guys stopped, and he came over and he was like, what's up? And I said, what are you doing here? And he goes, well, the government sent us. I mean, like, those words, turn your blood to ice. And I'm like, what government sent you, And he said, well, the government sent us to clear this land all the way to the river ahead of the border wall. And the river to the levee on our property is 1.2 miles. And the company is called TIKIGAQ, Tikigaq, an Alaska National Corporation, clearing private property at the tip of South Texas. And this was 9 months before any congressional vote or appropriation authorizing or funding border wall. And I said, this is my property. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, this is private property. You need to get off now. And he goes, well, I think I need to call my supervisor. And I said, yeah, I think you should do that right now. And he did call his supervisor. And when the supervisor got there, he was on the phone and he was waving some papers around. And I went to speak to him and he was like, get back over there. And the papers, he refused to show me, but they had photos of our property, of our entrance, of our gate, of everything. So they were in the right place in terms of where the government sent them, but they had absolutely no authority to be there. And that was the day that we noticed the surveyor's stakes and the giant, so they're like these plastic strips and nails about that long that they form an X. And apparently that's what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers uses for aerial surveying. Mm-hmm. So the surveyors and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had also entered our property with no right of entry. So it's wholesale trespass. occupation of our land, destruction of our property with no legal process whatsoever.
And it couldn't have just been happening to you.
No, at that point, we drove all around and saw the surveyor stakes and the aerial survey marks on the roads everywhere. And at that time, I had a border community liaison officer. And he was a Border Patrol agent whose job it is to liaise with landowners and the
Right.
public. And I called him and I was like, dude, what's going on? And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, there are these guys here on our, and he goes, let me find out. I'll call you back. He didn't call me back. I called him back later and I was like, have you got any answers? And he was like, no. And at the same time, the board president, Dr. Jeffrey Glassberg, and his wife
At the Butterfly Center.
at the Butterfly Center, but they were at their home in New Jersey. Dr. Jane Scott had gone into hospice about a week earlier. And her husband, the board president, my boss, told me, unless the place burns to the ground, do not contact me. And I sent him photos of the heavy equipment and the destruction on the land and asked if I had permission to go to the media. And he responded, yes, that was it. And she passed away the next day. But I filmed a very impromptu piece. The wind is screaming, I'm screaming at the camera, and we uploaded it to YouTube because Border Patrol just, they didn't come forward with any answers that day. And so we went public. At that point, the news media started responding. The next morning, Border Patrol sent 5 agents to the Butterfly Center to deal with me, not even to meet with me. But they arrived and they said, what you're alleging did not happen. So this is,
Don't believe your eyes. Don't believe what you have. Didn't happen.
It didn't happen. I went down the rabbit hole July 20th, 2017, and I'm still there. So I said, get in your trucks, boys, and follow me. Because the heavy equipment was still there, the felled trees, everything was still there. And these 5 agents, you could tell they were all like, oh, shit, you know, like, whatever was happening was very clearly above their pay grade. I understand that they did not know what was happening. Several of these guys I knew, I dealt with them for the past, 5 years. So they were not lying. They were genuinely surprised, but they still had no answers. And they said someone would get back to me. Someone from the Customs and Border Protection Real Estate Office would be in touch with me. And we set an appointment for August 1st, so it was going to take them that long to, I don't know what, prepare. And on August 1st, I got a text message that the meeting had been canceled. So I still have never gotten any information or any answers. On August 1st, 2017, Chief Manuel Padilla, who at the time was the Border Patrol chief of the McAllen sector, Rio Grande Valley sector, I believe, showed up to see me in plain clothes with his attaché in an unmarked vehicle and a uniformed agent. And he told me this was for the border wall. Our contractors will return with green uniform presence, which I said, you mean armed federal agents on private property to guard for-profit contractors? And he said, well, to fulfill our mission. And that no one could stop them, and that the National Butterfly Center and Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park and the 2 wildlife refuges, the federal properties that form our section, the NABA section of the lower Rio Grande Valley Wildlife Conservation Corridor, would be ground zero for Trump's border wall, because we represented the path of least resistance. That's how I found out what we were in for.
How did you keep from losing your mind?
I don't know. I'm still struggling with that one.
No, I understand that, but all right. So the path forward to deal with this went how?
Well, my boss is making funeral arrangements for his wife and, in the throes of grief. And so I'm having to deal with other board members at the time, and they're dumbfounded. I mean, they're just in shock and disbelief, really.
Yes.
I mean, as anyone would be, they're like, what? I'm having to explain this a million times. And one of the board members said, do you have any local members who are lawyers, members of the National Butterfly Center or NABA, who are attorneys? Can you reach out to them and see, where do we go from here? What do we do? And so I did that. There were a couple of members who were lawyers, and they stepped forward. And even though eminent domain and some of these other issues are not their area of expertise,
Certainly.
They were able to connect us to people like the Texas Civil Rights Project and the American Civil Liberties Union. And those people have been invaluable in their guidance and assistance. And so we started, just gathering everything that we needed to for the attorneys, and we filed suit. In December of 2017, we filed suit against the federal government, against the Trump administration and the Secretary of Homeland Defense, who at the time was Christian Nielsen. That's changed a couple of times since then. And then our suit hung out for 14 months. We never had a single day in court. And what my boss now calls the Valentine's Day Massacre, February 14th, 2019, Judge Richard Leon in Washington, D.C. summarily dismissed our suit. The day before, Trump signed the 2019 Department of Homeland Security spending bill, which exempted us from construction of border wall, but only with monies appropriated by Congress. And on that same day, Trump declared the fake state of emergency and announced his intention to take billions of dollars from the Department of Defense and other programs. That day, he was informed that the Treasury Department would be handing over $601 million in Treasury forfeiture funds that he would use to build the border wall. And so there's the rub. And we've obtained court documents that, where members of the administration and of the Department of Homeland Security declare that those monies will be used exclusively in the Rio Grande Valley to build border barrier, border wall. And it was in May that Trump and his son-in-law Kushner met with senators about immigration and border wall and everything. And the report was that the senators were underwhelmed with Kushner's performance and all of the actions that the administration was taking to deal with the crisis on the southern border. And Kushner is quoted as saying, "But we solved the butterfly thing, didn't we?" You can Google that. So the whole thing was a con. Surprise, surprise.
Well, let's talk about this, because we know this is a time of such change. Both you and I, we are both Mexicans, and hilariously, as we both get, you don't look Mexican. Mexican is not a nationality. It is not a race. It is a nationality.
Right.
This is our nation, and we have this challenge that we're seeing. This idea of putting a border is something that it's not even going to work.
It's not, especially in the Rio Grande Valley and other areas of South Texas, and ultimately Big Bend and other places. The river is the border.
Yes.
They're not patrolling the river. They're not building a barrier at the border. They're building it miles inland. They will be carving millions of acres off of Texas. And many people ask, why are they forfeiting the river? But the real scheme is that the U.S. government is not forfeiting the river. They are building the wall to protect the river from the people and to seize that natural resource from the people, to take control of it. And all of the pumps on the river, the pumps that bring in water to our treatment facilities and farms that keep more than 6 million people alive in South Texas.
Yes.
Those pumps will be behind the border wall, guarded by a paramilitary police force. So if they choose to turn off the water, as they've done in places like Venezuela,
Sure.
we literally die of thirst.
Yeah.
Even though we have the Rio Bravo
Yeah.
in our backyard.
How far along is this? Is there a reversibility to this, or a stoppage as much of the carnage has already been spent? And where are we along this process? Bring us up to date here in November 2019.
In February of 2019, actually on Super Bowl Sunday. So they take advantage of the times when people
Sure.
will be distracted.
Yep.
The equipment began rolling in. And in February, they began desiccating the National Wildlife Refuge tract adjacent to Benson State Park. So they bring in this piece of equipment that looks like an excavator, only instead of the digging arm, it has a grinder on it. And this grinder starts at the top of a tree and goes zzzz, and turns the whole tree and everything in it into sawdust in a matter of seconds. And so that area has been razed, that remnant of native habitat, in an area where less than 5% of our native vegetation remains. And it's all set aside for conservation of plant and animal species.
Absolutely. By that huge liberal Richard Nixon, who set up the EPA, right?
Yeah. And so they've cleared what the government calls the enforcement zone, which is now a dead zone. And they're smoothing it out, and they've marked the area for excavation where they will pour the concrete footing, because what we are getting is 18-foot tall vertical concrete wall with 18-foot tall steel bollard wall on top, and then 22-foot tall all-night blitzkrieg lighting that will focus on the conservation areas. And you know, all you have to do is go to like darkskies.org and other places to understand the impact that light pollution has on plants, mammals, birds, insects. So this is wholesale destruction.
Yes.
Of what my boss has called a fragile but vibrant ecosystem. And we're a subtropical zone. You know, the desert is alive, even though people think it's just sand and cactus. But we don't even look like sand and cactus. I mean, we are the alluvial delta of the Rio Grande River as it floods into the Laguna Madre, as it spills into the Gulf of Mexico. So we have incredibly fertile farmland. We have riverine woodland that's endangered. We have 11 biologically distinct ecosystems in a 4-county region as you go from the rocky terrain and the oyster beds of Starr County into the salt marsh of South Padre Island. And this area all borders the river where the wall is being built.
Is there, you have gone and testified to Congress. You have worked, where is this in the resistance in stopping this madness? You
know, people can only sustain their distress and fury for so long.
Absolutely. That's one of the...
And we have Trumpster fire after Trumpster fire daily. I think that what has to happen is that people's outrage needs to be consolidated. They need to understand that the border wall isn't just about national security. In fact, it has absolutely nothing to do with national security. It is a scheme concocted by for-profit corporations to steal more of our tax dollars. It is built inland, where it requires the largest theft of private property in modern history. It is a hurdle and a harvesting mechanism for the for-profit prisons, because ladders, because gates. It will do absolutely nothing to stop anyone from landing on U.S. soil with drugs, with weapons, with people. It will simply allow Border Patrol and Core Civic and the GEO Group to gather more of those people and put them in the for-profit prisons, while the construction project rewards the Sullivan Brothers and Fisher Industries and Southwestern constructors. All of these campaign donors and the border wall steal. We've pushed the Oversight Committee and the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Committee and other members of Congress, as well as investigative journalists, to prove us wrong, and no one has.
Wow. That
the border wall steel, the rebar and the steel bollard, are coming primarily from a company called Evraz. Evraz is owned by 3 Russian oligarchs that are members of the Putin cartel. The primary owner is Roman Abramovich. His wife was the personal guest of Jared Kushner and of Ivanka at the inauguration. Roman is a Russian-Israeli businessman. So this ties into everything related to the U.S. support of Israel, the surveillance technology being used against U.S. citizens, against journalists and lawyers and activists and residents of the borderlands, all comes from Israel. These raid towers and aerostat balloons that we now have next door to us, that we operate in the shadow of for audio and video surveillance. It is wholesale theft of all of the dollars that should be used to support our education systems, our failing internal infrastructure like our highways and our dams.
And our water systems.
Our water systems, healthcare, homelessness, which, is a crisis in Austin.
Yes.
He's stealing money from veterans' pensions and military construction projects for this, from museums and libraries and from Meals on Wheels. And we're letting it happen because people believe that somehow the border wall is going to enhance their quality of life.
Yes.
When actually it's contributing to the destruction of it.
When we get a mythology like that, and that gets implanted, my sense is that this is as long as I can find, for whatever it is, the disquietude that I'm feeling within me, if I can find someone to blame so I don't have to look inside, then that's the victimization, and that's where I think that his brilliance is. Trump's brilliance is that he ties right into that victimization and said, if we deal with those people, if we just have them, you're going to be fine. And yet, we all know that this is the time of the greatest change and transformation in human history. We are moving into an entirely new way. This is not. It's going to require a great deal and all hands on deck in order for us to be able to do this.
It is, and we've got to overhaul immigration in this country for a million reasons.
Yes.
We need a safe, fast, affordable mechanism. The last comprehensive immigration reform plan that was proposed and went to Obama, went to Congress, was actually crafted by the American Medical Association and the American Bar Association, and it was totally predatory. It required that immigrants have a lawyer of record and a doctor of record for 10 years and see them and pay them for those visits every 6 months in order to apply for citizenship. So, the people who are already doing the jobs, the dirty jobs,
Yes.
scrubbing our toilets, slaughtering our pigs, washing our dishes,
Getting up on our roofs in 100 and some odd degree temperature to re-roof.
exactly, digging our sewer trenches, the people doing all of these jobs for no benefits, often not even getting paid, being abused,
Yep.
working, excessively long days for less than minimum wage and all of this, were offered a salvo that further harmed and victimized them. But no one profits from real solutions. This border wall not only
Oh my God.
divides us politically in the valley, it is a steel cleaver.
Yeah.
It's cutting our lands in half. It's separating us from our physical and natural and cultural inheritance, from our natural resources, our lifeblood, the Rio Grande River. But it is also cutting families in two, separating children from their mothers, husbands from their wives, in
How are we, so how do you see the situation down in the valley in the sense of, are we beginning to see movement in conversation and getting the people to be able to say, wait a minute, we've got, because the valley is going through an enormous economic change with Boca Chica, and so we have space tourism that is going on, LNG places going on, and plastics and all. I mean, it is changing because they're looking cheap land, labor. And hey,
the conversations that need to take place are not happening because, we're all busy going about our daily lives, and
Aren't
if
we
it doesn't,
just?
if you don't feel like it affects you directly, then you don't engage in that conversation. So a huge part of my challenge has been changing the narrative.
Yep.
We hear that everywhere, but I had a local insurance agent who used to be on the Mission Chamber of Commerce board recently come to me and say, hey, how's it going? They still trying to take your land? And I said, you mean poison your water? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, they've waived 28 laws for this project, including the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Solid Waste Disposal Act. Where does your water come from? Why would they waive those laws if they're not going to break them? And he was like, well, I hadn't thought about that. And we had further discussions about that. And I said, and, they're destroying our beaches. They're permitting 3 new LNG terminals at the Port of Brownsville. They're deepening the ship channel. There's no liquid natural gas really being piped into the Port of Brownsville right now. So why are they building infrastructure for that? Because once the border wall is built, they're putting pipeline in behind it. That is the big plan. And when you look at all the players, Kelsey Warren of Energy Transfer Partners, of the Dakota Keystone XL pipeline, who also got about half of that steel from Evraz. When you look at, he's a Texas Parks and Wildlife Commissioner. When you look at our former governor, Perry, who's now the energy secretary. When you look at Eagle Ford Shale and how all of that has to be exported now over to Del Rio and then to Three Rivers or to Port Aransas and further out east. the most expeditious route for all of that will be from Del Rio down the Rio Grande to the port of Brownsville.
And they wouldn't have any problem because they have already walled it off and
They've already walled it off, and Border Patrol has already hired the former sheriff of Cass County, North Dakota, who worked with Tiger Swan and the FBI to squash the resistance, has hired them to train them in how to deal with protests. In addition, the Texas legislature this year passed House Bill 3557. It criminalizes free speech with a conspiracy clause. It comes with 10 years in prison for protesting critical infrastructure like pipeline. And if a landowner supports or participates or even allows protests on their property, the government can seize the land. That includes the mineral rights there. And when Bush built border wall, the enforcement zone, this dead zone I spoke about, was on average about 40 feet wide, enough for Border Patrol to put in their all-weather terrain road. Under Trump, it's a minimum 150 feet wide. And it includes these lights, when the only things in this country that have those lights are our highways, our prisons, and our pipelines. When Trump came to Texas in April of this year, when he went to Crosby after the plant explosion, he signed 2 executive orders. One of them ordered the EPA to close all of the loopholes that allow states to sue under the Clean Water Act to challenge pipelines. And the other executive order gave sole authority to permitting international pipelines to the President of the United States. In addition, the current federal highway spending bill, a 500-page bill, includes a poison pill. It exempts all pipeline projects from NEPA, from the National Environmental Policy Act. And that is what would make it possible once the government has seized all of this land by eminent domain and put up the border wall. They will go in and put pipeline behind it. And what do pipelines do? They leak, as we've just seen again
of course,
in North Dakota. And that will be leaking into the water table and into the Rio Grande River, into the Gulf of Mexico. And the only source of fresh water for 6 million people will be contaminated.
That hurts my heart.
It hurts everything in me. It makes me want to throw up and cry and scream all at the same time. And people don't know this is what's happening.
Yes.
They think, I'm not affected. The government's not taking my land. But if they saw the full picture. So for 2 years, I have felt like I have been often the lone crazy woman screaming in the wilderness on the banks of the Rio Grande River that this is the truth. This is the plan. And all the pieces are coming together. But I guess I'm still the only one putting that puzzle together for everyone to see.
Thank God. Thank God, thank God, thank God that you're doing that. How do you, as a human being, Marianna, get up the next day? What is your recharge process to be able to say, okay, I'm going to get up one more day. I'm going to give it with all of the... Because we understand the process, that we did not invent corruption in this, but we know that this self-interest and that is systemic. It's part of here. It's in our Mexico. It's part of what we're doing. And so, can we talk about how we reclaim our democracy and reclaim our rights in the process that we're doing, because it's a process.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear a politician say, "Oh, well, no problem, we'll just have a revolution, it'll just be done," it's harder than that. It's a process. We've got to, my personal view is that we need more women. Because that if there were much more of a balance in the that we would make different decisions.
Well, I would hope so. You know, Einstein is attributed with saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And as long as we keep electing old white guys to office, we're going to keep getting the same thing. Only it's not that simple. Although I guess technically Henry Cuellar is white too, because as you said, Mexican or Mexican American is not a race. But you know, in Texas we have this, I call them the unholy triumvirate.
Yeah.
With regard to the border wall and Geo Group and Core Civic, and that's Henry Cuellar, John Carter, and John Culberson. 3 U.S. representatives who are highest on the campaign contribution list for Geo Group and Core Civic. They are literally crafting this policy for profit that personally benefits them and keeps them in power while screwing all of us.
Yeah.
So how do I get up and go to work every day? It's hard. You know, I've received all kinds of threats.
Yes.
My husband and my children have lost friends and business and been bullied and ostracized, and you know, I've lost employees. It's really been awful.
Yes.
But I'm not the kind who's going to kowtow to that or cower or, you know, I am going to, every chance I get to speak or to see Henry Cuellar, call him out for his conflict of interest, which is the polite term for corruption.
Exactly.
As long as we let these people sell us out and screw us over, we get what we deserve.
Yep.
So until everyone is outraged and infurious and says no more, votes them out of office, or runs them out of town.
Yep.
You know? But yeah, I mean, maybe it's going to take more women who refuse to say, I won't let this happen to my children and my grandchildren and my home. You know, Beto O'Rourke came to see me several times when he was, you know, running for Senate, which he was never really doing. It was all a setup for running for president. And then he voted for the 2018 Consolidated Appropriation Act that funded the border wall through us. And I asked him, you know, what the fuck are you doing? How could you do that to us, you know? And he said, I wasn't voting for that. I had to vote for the, you know, when they roll it all into one, we have to make these hard choices. And I was like, yes. And we get to make the hard choices at the ballot box.
Yes.
And everybody's got to do that. Everybody's got to say enough is enough. And maybe we deal with horrors like this 4 years. But we cannot have dynastic politicians in places where they are the grand lord and overseer. We have to vote them out every chance we get. Let them serve, you know, and I know people say progress takes time. You know, the first term they serve, they're just learning the ropes. Too damn bad. Learn faster. Get in there, have an agenda, get it done, and get out. You know, and we've got to, it's going to be uncomfortable for us.
Yes.
I mean, people voted for Trump saying no more Clintons. I'm not going to have, you know, no more Bushes, no more Clintons, no more Obamas, no more Kennedys, no more. If we wanted kings and queens in this country, we should still be England.
Yeah.
So we didn't get another Clinton. We got this nightmare. But we have a chance to change that in a year. I personally have told everybody who knows me, I will vote for the turd my dog lays 2 minutes before the election if that turd gets the Democratic nomination. And Democrats better decide that they are going to vote for whoever the nominee is. That's how we wound up with Trump.
Yep.
The Republicans, the evangelicals, the Tea Party, the moderates, the rhinos, everybody said he got the nomination, we're going to vote for him. Because that's the only way we stay in power.
Yep.
And we've got to
what is
flip it.
This is the thing that I ask about power, because we were talking about this on the pre-interview, and because I try to think of the word, what does the word enough mean? So how does, when we get, what would enough be? Because you talk about how a day in New Orleans, and you know, and spending time there, or getting up and putting your hands in the dirt and working on that, because that really feeds your soul. And but what does this word enough mean?
For the people in power, there's never enough.
That's the point. I think it's as addictive. It must be. It must be more addictive than I can even imagine.
Crack or sex or anything.
It must be, because it astounds me how we will sell out principles, sell out our soul in order to keep this thing. It must be extraordinary.
It has to be, to know that you're up there pulling the strings and making the decisions, and we have to get corporations and their money out of our election process. We have to have campaign finance reform in this country, but the bastards aren't going to do it to themselves.
No. Well, and this is the thing that I find curious about that is that, or hard about it, is that where does that campaign finance money go? It goes to the media. Why would the media give up that portion, that huge amount of money that's coming into them? It's such, so there has to be some root into this that we can begin to.
We cannot discount the mainstream media's role in all of this. John Mayer, who I love.
Tell me who he is.
He's a musician, a songwriter and a musician. And in one of his songs, Waiting on the World to Change. But he says, when they own the information, they can bend it all they want.
Yeah.
And as long as they are crafting the stories that go on TV and in the newspaper, we're in real trouble. A local reporter, Mitchell Furman, who is a stringer for the New York Times, wrote an article about the border wall construction in South Texas. And even though he knows the truth, he knows that levee wall and levee fence are the border wall and the border fence. And he'd seen the documents and heard the recordings that I have from the Department of Homeland Security and everything. He and another author had a piece published in the New York Times that said the National Butterfly Center wasn't getting border wall. We were getting levee improvements. He's not a journalist. He's a creative fiction writer. And we have to hold the media to task too.
Yeah, we all. This is the whole thing that I feel about that has been said many times, is that Donald Trump is not the disease. He is a symptom of it. It's something that we have to own. I have to own my own part of being in this participatory democracy, this republic, this idea of we've got to have this conversation. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you, is because it's my way of understanding and getting more involved in it, because you inspire me to look at what am I doing? And how am I going to be part of this? And so you're going tonight, it happens to be, we're in November the 9th, I believe, 10th, of 2019. Tonight you're going to the Texas Observer. You're having the premiere of this film, I, Mariposa.
They're going to show I, Mariposa, and I, Mariposa has 3 characters. It has Zulema and myself and the butterfly. And if I had $1 for every time somebody said, bitch, butterflies can fly over the border wall, I'd be a millionaire already. But it's not about who can overcome the wall. Butterflies, birds, other things. It's not about all of the life forms that will be trapped between the river and the wall and condemned to death, when the river floods, when we have wildfires. It is about our liberty. It is about the Constitution and our principles. It's actually about our very humanity.
Yes.
And as we're here at the 30-year anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, how many lessons have we forgotten? Like you said, Donald Trump, we know he's amoral, ahistorical,
Ignorant,
illiterate,
But that's why, and I say ignorant because I understand. I don't mean that as a pejorative. It's just a descriptive.
But as you said, he's a symptom. And America now has millions more like him because the people in power have underfunded our schools.
Yes.
They have played a very deliberate game of destroying all of the things that belong to us as Americans.
Yes.
In order to cripple us, to make us ignorant, illiterate, to make us ahistorical. Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it.
Yep. And that's that's our opportunity then. Our opportunity is to have these conversations and to be able to say, maybe there's something. Everyone is so busy right now, it's hard to keep focus. We work harder and longer than we ever have in history. And so it's hard to keep that focus. And of course, then we also have the wonderful consumer culture that constantly feeds me and gets a part of it. So in order to take a bite out of it small enough for me able to do, what do you recommend? What do you recommend things that I can pay attention to, that can put my mind around, and the wonderful people that are watching us can put our minds around?
I say, invest in children, because we have to educate them, and we need to unplug, not only for our health, but, the television and cable and free internet and Facebook, what I call the digital teat, exists to keep us suckling and distracted and
Right.
comfortable. And until we reject that, we are pawns and puppets. And so you've got to do two things: unplug and connect with children, and connect with children in a way that you're showing them the natural world. You're teaching them history. You're teaching them to read. I call it creating anarchists because you have to teach them that why is the key to everything. If you've ever...
Why? Isn't it? But when you look into the face of these kids that are there at the National Butterfly Center, when you look into their faces, doesn't it give you hope? Aren't they brilliant? Aren't they beautiful?
They are
Aren't
brilliant,
amazing?
and they're beautiful, and they're curious, and we are all born with this natural curiosity that life works really hard to wring out of us. Yeah. Henry Ford and the Teachers College at Columbia developed that school bell system to imitate the factory whistle. I mean, we are programmed so early, and we've got to reject and overcome that. We have to throw off the shackles, and there's shackles on our minds, on our bodies, on our spirits. And why is the key to everything. And back to this corruption and enough and power and government and the laws that are being passed and all the dirty deeds that are being done in the dark. The why is money.